The cameras have already moved on. The speeches have ended. The dramatic moment, whatever version of it people choose to believe, has already been absorbed into the news cycle. But what's unfolding in Venezuela was never meant to be understood as a single event. Because Venezuela is not the story, it's the signal. A signal that fits into a much larger pattern, one that stretches from the Arctic to the Caribbean, from shipping lanes to currency systems, from oil fields to financial plumbing, most people never think about. If you look at Venezuela in isolation, none of this makes sense. If you look at it as part of a strategic map, it suddenly does. This isn't about personalities, it isn't about ideology, and it certainly isn't about moral outrage. It's about leverage. Today, I want to walk you through the structural logic behind what's happening, not the headlines, but the machinery underneath them. Because once you see that machinery, Venezuela stops looking like a crisis and starts looking like a move. For decades, the Western Hemisphere was treated as politically unstable but economically predictable. Trade routes were fixed, energy flowed through known channels. The dollar was the default language of exchange. That world is quietly breaking apart. Over the last 20 years, China didn't just increase trade with Latin America, it reoriented it through ports, rail corridors, long-term commodity contracts, and financial clearing mechanisms. This wasn't accidental, it was systematic. Today, much of South America exports more to Asia than to the United States. Infrastructure increasingly points west across the Pacific, not north. And that creates a problem Washington cannot ignore. Because influence doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes, deal by deal, contract by contract, currency by currency. Venezuela sits at the center of that erosion. On paper, Venezuela looks irrelevant. Production is low, infrastructure is damaged, the economy has been hollowed out. But paper doesn't determine power, position does. Venezuela holds enormous reserves, not just of oil, but of optionality. Whoever shapes its future shapes how and in what currency that future is monetized. This is where most commentary misses the point. The question isn't how much oil Venezuela produces today. The question is who controls the rules under which it could produce tomorrow. And more importantly, who sets the terms of payment. For half a century, energy markets have run on an unspoken rule. Oil moves in dollars. That rule does more than simplify trade. It props up an entire financial order. If you need oil, you need dollars. If you need dollars, you interact with U.S. financial systems. And if you interact with those systems, you're subject to their pressure. But that system only works if alternatives don't scale. China understands this perfectly, which is why its push isn't military, it's infrastructural. Payment systems, settlement mechanisms, and currency swaps. Venezuela, according to multiple reporting threads, was drifting toward that alternative ecosystem. Not loudly, not defiantly, but steadily. And that made it dangerous, not because of volume, but because of precedent. A resource-rich state pricing future energy outside the dollar framework is not just a supplier, it's a proof of concept. That is what triggered alarms. Publicly, the language is familiar. Stability, security, democracy, order. Privately, the incentives are different. What matters is denomination control, not humanitarian outcomes. Alignment of contracts, not speeches. Predictability of future flows. The contradiction between public messaging and strategic behavior isn't accidental, it's functional. One side reassures allies, the other resets expectations. And Venezuela became the place where those two tracks collided. This is where the broader picture comes into focus. Pressure on trade partners to the north, renewed attention to Arctic resources, increased scrutiny of canal transit and maritime insurance, and now direct intervention in an energy-dense state drifting out of alignment. These are not isolated decisions. They are defensive consolidations. Before great power competition turns kinetic, it turns logistical. You secure your energy, harden your trade routes, and make sure your hemisphere isn't underwriting someone else's supply chain. Venezuela fits neatly into that logic. Financial markets see the bet even if the public doesn't. They're reacting not to what Venezuela is, but to what it might become: rebuilt infrastructure, restored output, and contracts rewritten under familiar rules. That's an optimistic assumption. It requires stability, legitimacy, and clear authority, none of which currently exist. Which is why this situation is far more fragile than the headlines suggest. The most dangerous phase isn't intervention, it's ambiguity. Who signs contracts? Who guarantees security? Who enforces rulings? Without clear answers, capital freezes, insurance vanishes, and supply chains hesitate. And that vacuum doesn't stay empty. It fills with fragmentation, shadow markets, and external counterpressure. This is where other powers step in quietly, not with troops, but with financing, shipping, and parallel systems. From here, Venezuela can move in only a few directions: a managed transition, slow and negotiated, a fractured state with competing power centers, or a prolonged economic tug of war between external sponsors. Each path carries costs. None guarantee control. All test credibility. And history suggests that removing constraints is easier than constructing order. Venezuela is not an endpoint, it's a diagnostic. It shows how global competition is shifting away from ideology and toward infrastructure, currency, and resource governance. The real contest isn't about who governs Caracas. It's about who writes the rules under which energy, money, and logistics move across the hemisphere. That contest is no longer theoretical, it's active. And Venezuela is where it surfaced. Not as a scandal, not as a rescue, but as a recalibration of power. That's the story most coverage missed, not the moment, the mechanism. If this breakdown helped you see the Venezuela situation differently, take a second to support the channel. Click like so this analysis reaches more people, subscribe for deeper looks at geopolitics beyond the headlines, and let me know in the comments what you think the real endgame is here. Stabilization, fragmentation, or something we're still not seeing. The discussion matters because this story is far from over.